Chapter 15. The Fire Chief Pays a Call. There was no question about Misty's happiness. She pranced around the ponies that came and went as if she knew that they were temporary guests, while she, Misty, was one of the family. This was her home. When she playfully nipped the older ponies, they would lay back their ears until they saw who it was. Then they would whinny as much as to say, "Oh, it's only Misty." She could be wild as a hare or gentle as a lamb. When the days grew brisk, she would gallop across the hard marsh. Then suddenly she would stop stock still, letting a gull light on her back while her nostrils quivered with excitement. "Do you reckon Phantom is happy too?" Marine asked one day when the winter wind blew raw and cold. "Course she's happy," replied Paul. "Did you see me riding her down the point before breakfast? She was neighing for joy. Her hoofs barely touched the earth." "Oh, I know she's happy then, but..." "But what?" "Well, sometimes I see her leaning out over the fence, not yearning for the grass on the other side of it, but just looking away towards the white hills and the sea." "And is there something," Paul asked after a little thought, "is there something far away about her?" "That's what I mean, Paul." "I've noticed it too," Paul admitted. "Sometimes, when you can see the wild ponies frisking along Assateague Beach, she seems to be watching them, and it's kind of sad. Like the time you wanted the doll with real hair at the carnival, and you won the pencil box instead." Marine blushed. "Now that I've grown up, I've almost forgotten about that doll. And Phantom will forget her young days too." "Sure she will. We'll race her every day. She's happy then." There was no doubt about it. The Phantom was wild with happiness when she raced. She showed it in the arching of her neck, in the upward pluming of her tail, in the flaring of her nostrils. Paul or Marine had only to close their legs in on her sides to make her surge forward. Then she would skim the earth like the gulls she knew so well. With the passing days, the island folk began to notice her speed. "Reckon Black Comet's gonna have a little competition next pony penning," some said, shaking their heads wisely. Others sneezed at the idea. "Phantom's got too much wildness in her," they said. "She's just as liable to jump the fence as run around the track. You can't depend on them wild ones." Over in Pocomoke there was talk of the Phantom too. In the schoolyards, across dinner tables, in the barber shops, everywhere the Phantom's name could be heard. "She's built for speed," one mainlander admitted. "But I still favor Black Comet. He's used to the crowds. He knows how to snug along the fence. He knows how to save his power for the home stretch." Spring came early to the little sea island. By the first week in April, myrtle bushes were covered over with a yellow fuzz, and pine trees wore light green fingertips to show another year's growth. Phantom seemed to grow more restless as the season advanced. When Paul and Marine came home from school, they sometimes found her pacing round and round the corral, her head lowered. Other times she stood leaning far out over the fence, and there was a wild, sad look about her. "Maybe she's looking for us," Marine would say hopefully. "Maybe," nodded Paul. One late afternoon toward the end of April, the fire chief paid a surprise call. "We 'spected you was comin'," exclaimed Grandma, her round face beaming. "See, Marine's got a place all laid out for ye." The fire chief smiled. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. He counted the blue and white plates around the kitchen table. Then he sniffed the ham baking, and he saw the heaping mound of oysters rolled in eggs and cracker meal and fried a golden brown. He moistened his lips. "I'm staying," he said. There was not much talk while Grandma cut slivers of pink ham, dished up the oysters, and ladled hot gravy over the dumplings, and there was even less while everyone ate his fill. At last the fire chief pushed his plate aside and lighted his pipe. "I really came to see the owners of the Phantom," he said between puffs. "Wonder if they'd be interested in—" At exactly that moment the fire chief's pipe went out, and he had to stop in the middle of what he had to say. Slowly he found a match and relit it. Paul and Marine's eyes were fixed on the chief's. They leaned forward on the very edge of their chairs. "I was wondering if they'd be interested in—" He stopped to puff and puff. "Yes?" questioned Paul. "In maybe racing the Phantom against Black Comet." Paul's eyes caught Marine's. Then their faces broke into a grin. "Oh," chortled Grandpa, "I don't know who the joke's on, but these two been expecting to race the Phantom ever since last pony penning day." "Even before that," Marine said gleefully. "Why, that morning over on Assateague when we first saw the Phantom, we talked about it even then." Paul blushed. "I guess we just took it for granted that you'd ask us." The fire chief laughed heartily. "Well then, now it's settled for sure," he said as he stood up to go. "Lucy Lee can't run this year. She'll be having a new colt around about then, and Patches has been sold to a dealer. So it'll be the Phantom against Black Comet and Delbert's chestnut filly, Firefly. And may the best hoss win," said Grandpa. Chapter 16. The Pully Bone. The next 3 months were filled with excitement for Phantom and her owners. Paul and Marine were conditioning her for the big race. They fed her more liberally on grain. They rode her 3 miles each day, starting off at a slow jog, then trotting her, then asking for a burst of speed midway of the ride, then slowly jogging her back home again. It was the early morning when the world was all red and gold with the rising sun that Paul and Marine chose for Phantom's training period. They would take turns riding her across the tundra-like beach, hard-packed after a rain. Up and down Main Street, where her hoofs sounded like seashells pinging against the pavement, over trails carpeted with pine needles, where she made no sound at all. They rode her out to the pony penny grounds, getting her used to the feel of the track and the sight of the white fence. Before long the Phantom came to be a familiar and glorious sight. Her fame grew and spread. Now, on pleasant Sundays, visitors from the mainland began coming to see her. Misty grew jealous of the attention her mother was getting. She would nose in, trying to nip the buttons from the men's coats or the flowers from the ladies' hats. One time she lifted a hat all covered over with roses and dropped it in the water barrel. This brought Grandpa Beebe running with a handful of gunny sacks. He pretended to be angry as he rescued the dripping hat and tried to dry it off with the sacks. "Paul and Marine," he would shout in his thunderous voice, "hain't you never gonna drive any sense into that Misty's head? She'll grow up thinking she's a baby all her days. Never seen a critter so meddlesome." As July came in and pony penning day drew near, something came between Paul and Marine. If Paul worked around the barnyard, Maureen made some excuse to go off down to the oyster boats to see if the men had brought up any sea stars in their oyster tongs. And if Maureen worked at home for Grandma and Grandpa, Paul went off treading clams for Kim Horsepepper or catching seahorses. "What's the matter twixt Paul and Maureen?" Grandma asked Grandpa one night after the house was still. "I don't know for sure, mind ye, but I suspicion it's about the race," Grandpa replied. "Why, I thought 'twas all settled. Hain't the Phantom going to run?" "Of course, but the catch is, who's to ride her?" "They're both hankering to ride?" questioned Grandma. "That would be my guess," Grandpa nodded. Finally, on the Monday morning before pony penning, Grandma asked the question right out. She and Maureen were hanging up clothes at the time, while Paul, perched on top of a chicken coop, was silently whittling a pole into a clothes prop. "Which of ye," Grandma said as she removed a clothespin from her mouth, "which of ye will ride Phantom in the big race?" A long silence was the only answer. "Well, well," said Grandma brightly, "if you won't state your rathers, I got a fine idea." Still no answer. Maureen shook the creases out of a tablecloth as if her life depended on it. Paul kept on whittling furiously. Just then Grandpa Beebe came by. He glanced round sharply. "Why's everyone so hushed?" he asked. "Except for the flapping of the clothes, I'd think 'twas Sunday meetin' time." "Why, I just asked who's to ride Phantom come pony penning day," replied Grandma, hanging her clothespin bag on the line and looking from one to the other. "Oh," said Grandpa, and he strung the word out until it seemed to have springs in it. He dropped the post-hole digger he was carrying and toed it with his boots. Seconds went by. "If I wasn't in my 73, he shook his finger, "if I wasn't in my 73 going on my 74, I'd settle the whole matter and ride her myself." Grandma straightened up from the clothes basket. "Clarence," she said, speaking loud enough so her voice would reach Paul, "seems like something told me to save the pulley bone from that marsh hen. It's hanging above the almanac in the kitchen." Grandpa slapped his thigh. "Nothing could be fairer than a pulley bone," he exclaimed. "The one that breaks off the biggest part gets to ride." "I'll fetch it," Maureen called over her shoulder as she disappeared into the kitchen. She came out holding one end of the wishbone very gingerly, as though it might break off in her hand. "Now then," Grandpa cleared his throat nervously. Grandma picked up the empty clothes basket, then set it down again on the very same spot. "Now then," Grandpa repeated, "stop that gol dern whittling and step up, Paul." Paul's legs seemed as wobbly as a colt's. He came forward very slowly, and his hand shook as he grasped the other end of the wishbone with his thumb and forefinger. "Squint your eyes tight," Grandma directed. "Make your wish, and when I count to 3, pull." Paul and Maureen each took a long, deep breath as they clutched the tiny wishbone that was to decide their fate. 1, Grandma counted slowly. 2 it is, and 3. With a slight cracking noise, the wishbone broke. The larger half was in Paul's hand. He gave a whistle of joy. Then his face sobered as he caught sight of Maureen, who was burying her half of the wishbone in the sandy soil. She looked up, trying to cover her feelings with a little smile. "You won, Paul," she said, blinking. "You'll ride better anyway." Chapter 17. Wings on Her Feet. The last Thursday in July dawned hot and still. Another pony penning day had come. By sunup, the causeway between the mainland and Chincoteague was choked with traffic. Trucks, station wagons, jeeps, cars of every description, all bringing visitors to the island. They watched excitedly as the wild ponies swam ashore after the roundup. They lined the streets to see the procession to the pens. They cheered the bronco busters. But even after these events were over, the crowds kept on coming. For this year, the big event was the race. Phantom was running, a wild seahorse against the sleek, well-trained Black Comet, winner for 3 years. Toward evening, a light wind came up, whisking sheep clouds before it. The sun was a huge red balloon hovering over the bay as Paul and Maureen, riding double on Phantom, turned into the pony penning grounds. Maureen slid to her feet, and before she could whisper a word of encouragement into the Phantom's ear, she was caught like a fly in a web. Her schoolmates, her uncles and aunts, everyone wanted to be with her during the race. They felt sorry for her because she was not riding. They seemed to wrap themselves about her until she could hardly breathe. Oh, how she longed to be by herself. Then she could race with Paul and the Phantom. Only by being alone could she be Paul and Phantom both. It was the voice over the loudspeaker that came to her rescue. "Tonight, ladies and gentlemen," the voice blared. "Tonight, Black Comet from Pocomoke races against Firefly and the Phantom." Everyone began running toward the track. Maureen slipped away from her friends and lost herself in the crowds. She wedged her way into a small opening between strangers, and soon she was standing at the rails, her stomach against a fence post. She heard strange voices all about her, but now there was no need to listen to them. They were so unimportant. They were as unimportant as the little insect voices of the night. She drew a deep breath as the names of the 3 entries were announced again. "There comes Black Comet," the cry went up on all sides. "There he is." She saw Black Comet amble out on the track, aloof and black as night. He seemed bored with the entire business. Maureen would not have been surprised at all to see him yawn. Now Firefly, a tall, rangy mare, prancing nervously to the starting post. Maureen's eyes passed over her lightly, then lingered on the Phantom, who was parading to the post with dignity in her manner. She seemed unaware of the crowds, as if for her they did not exist. Her head was uplifted, her nose testing the winds, her body trembling. She could not understand the delay. She sniffed the wind hungrily. The wind was calling her, yet Paul was holding her back. At last the signal was given. A roar went up from the crowd. "They're off!" "Black Comet at the rail," came the clipped voice over the loudspeaker. "Phantom on the outside. But it's Firefly who's taking the lead." From then on, no one could hear the announcer for all the yelling. The changeable crowds were calling, "Firefly! Firefly!" Firefly held the lead the first quarter. Then Black Comet shot forward and pulled out in front. Maureen dug her fingernails into the fence rail. "Phantom," she prayed. "Oh, Phantom, get it going. It's a race." But the Phantom was not running a race. She was enjoying herself. She was a piece of thistledown borne by the wind, moving through space in wild abandon. She was coming up not to pass Firefly and Black Comet, but for the joy of flying. Her legs went like music. She was sweeping past Firefly now. She was less than a length behind Black Comet. The people climbed up on the fence rails in a frenzy of excitement. "Come on, Black Comet!" screamed the crowds from Pocomoke. "Come on!" "Giddy up, Phantom!" cried the island folk. Maureen was no longer an onlooker. She was the Phantom, winging around the curve, her nostrils fire-red in the dying sun. She was Paul, leaning forward in a kind of wild glory. She was drawing close to Black Comet. Now she was even. She was sailing ahead. She was over the finish line. She was winner by a length. The crowds grew hysterical. "It's Phantom! Phantom! She's won!" But there was no stopping the Phantom. She was flying on around the track. The voice over the loudspeaker was laughing. "Only once round," it was saying. "Only once." Paul pulled back on the wicky and spoke softly in Phantom's ear. Gradually he brought her to a stop. Marine was laughing and crying too. The crowds pushed past her, dived between the rails, flocked around the Phantom. They yelled and thumped one another on the back as the judge handed Paul a purse. Paul felt its bulging contents, then his eyes swept the crowds. "Here I am," cried Marine. Every eye turned to see whom Paul wanted. When they discovered Marine, standing on the top rail of the fence like a bird on a twig, friends and strangers too clapped and cheered. In an instant Paul was riding through the little opening they had made. With the fence as a mounting block, Marine swung up behind Paul. The island folk went mad with happiness. "Hooray for Paul and Marine! Hooray for the Phantom!" they rejoiced. But Paul and Marine found only one face in all that sea of faces, and heard only one voice in all that blur of noise. It was Grandpa Beebs. "Get home," he bellowed. "Tell Grandma." All the way home Paul talked to the Phantom. "Do you know," he murmured, "do you know you won $12 whole? And we're going to spend it all on you." "We could buy her red plumes and ribbons to braid into her mane," suggested Marine. Paul leaned far forward to get as close as he could to Phantom's ear. "We could buy you shiny brass and leather trappings," he said. "You could be handsomer than any horse in the King's Guard." The Phantom let out a long whinny into the deepening twilight. Paul laughed and laughed. "Want to know what she said?" "What'd she say, Paul?" "She said, 'Buy that toaster for Grandma and Grandpa. As for me, all I want is wings on my feet.'" Chapter 18. A Wild Bugle. It rained fitfully during the night following the race. By morning the rain stopped and the sun broke through softly in slanting rays, drawing the moisture upward in thick curtains of mist. After the excitement of the day before, matters on Pony Ranch were settling down to their usual routine. Paul and Marine were busy with chores, Paul repairing the chicken house and Marine scrubbing the water pans. Misty tagged first one, then the other, like a puppy with two masters. Close to the fence stood the Phantom. She kept lifting her head upward, as if to worship the miracle of the sun drawing water. From time to time Paul took sidelong glances at her. "Let's take turns racing her as soon as our chores are done," he called to Marine. "You can be first." Marine smiled to herself. She knew Paul was trying to make it up to her for not riding in the race. She hurried with her chores. Then, with Misty at her heels, she hung her apron on the clothesline and went to get the wicky. When the Phantom caught sight of the wicky, she whinnied, then stood trembling while Marine slipped the rope-like root between her teeth, brought it under her chin, and tied a square knot. It was strange how gentle Phantom could be. But even in her gentleness there was a wilding look in her eye, as if only her body were inside the corral, while her real self lived somewhere far away. Grabbing Phantom's mane, Marine jumped onto her back. "Ready," she called Paul. Paul dropped his hammer and came running to let down the bars of the gate, which fitted into the horseshoes nailed into the fence post. Phantom pawed the ground nervously, as if irked by Paul's slowness. With one bar down, Marine put her heels into Phantom's side, and Phantom sailed over the hurdle and out onto the marshy plain. Misty tried to follow, but Paul pushed her back. "Soon we'll be racing you too," he promised, combing her foretop with his fingers. "But today we got to make Phantom happy." Then he carefully replaced the top bars, climbed over the fence, and wandered out to a lone pine tree. There he stood, leaning up against the tree, waiting for his turn. His blood quickened as he watched Phantom whip around the little point of land that went down to meet the sea. Around and across and up and down the flat tongue of land she swept, like the sea mews that soared overhead. At last Paul waved them in. "My turn." At exactly the moment when Marine turned Phantom over to Paul, there was the sound of a ringing neigh in the distance. It speared the morning stillness. It seemed to come, not from the sea, but from the Spanish galleon, back across the ages. Phantom's ears pricked. She jerked her head in the direction of Assateague Island. Tremblingly, she listened. The bugle came again, strong and clear. It brought Grandpa Beebe bounding over the gate, running toward Phantom. "It's the Pied Piper," he yelled. "He's coming to get the Phantom." Paul and Marine strained their eyes towards the island of Assateague, but all they could see were the white spumes from the billows and skeins of mist rising from the sea. Then suddenly one of the whitecaps seemed to be flying free. It was the foaming mane of the Pied Piper, racing in with the billows. "Get on Phantom's back," Grandpa called. "Whip her, Paul, whip her hard. Marine, get that gate open." Her heart pounding, Marine flew to the gate. As fast as she could, she let the bars down, at the same time shoving Misty back. "Paul," she cried, "get a handful of her mane, ride her towards Misty." With a gasp of anguish, she looked back. Paul was not trying to hold Phantom. He was slipping the wicky out of her mouth. He was giving Phantom her freedom. "Oh, Paul," screamed Marine, hold her, don't let her go." But her words were lost. The Phantom's whinnies were high with excitement. The Pied Piper was heading straight for her, his neck thrust forward, his head down, his eyes hidden by that long, creamy foretop. Grandpa waved his hat, trying to head him off, his arms whirling like a windmill. The Pied Piper veered around him, then he snorted and trumpeted to the heavens. "Paul," bellowed Grandpa, "you'll be trampled. Get out of the way." But Paul stood there as if caught in the Pied Piper's spell. For a moment the Phantom hesitated. She looked obediently to Paul, her master. Then that wild bugle sounded again. It seemed to awaken some force within her, creating a curious urging in her mind. A shudder of excitement went through her. She twisted her body high into the air as if she were shaking herself free of fences that imprisoned, free of stalls that shut out the smell of pines and the sound of the sea. An impatient whinny escaped her. She whirled past Paul, then ran flying to meet the Pied Piper. The air went wild with greeting, deep rumbling neighs, high joyous nickers. The stallion and the mare were brushing each other with their noses, talking together in soft little grunts. At last the Pied Piper nipped her and urged her forward. This time the Phantom did not hesitate. She flew towards her island home. Only once she turned her head as if she were looking backward. "Take good care of my baby," she seemed to say. "She belongs to the world of men, but I belong to the Isle of the Wild Things." For long seconds Paul and Grandpa and Marine stood still. They watched the Pied Piper plunge into the surf until he seemed part of the flying foam. They watched the Phantom until all they could see was the white map on her withers. Then the map smalled until it too was lost among the white caps of the sea. The air about them quivered like a violin string. Then suddenly the string snapped, and the everyday world was all about once more. Grandpa was no longer the wiry man who had bounded over the fence. He was himself, gnarled and a little stiff-legged as he walked to the gate. Paul followed along behind him, and some of Phantom's happiness seemed to shine in his face. He had given her the freedom she longed for. Marine lowered the bars of the gate for them, and then put them back in place. With one accord, the old man and the boy and girl went to Phantom's stall. It was not empty. Misty's quizzical little face with its funny blaze was peering around at them. She came trotting out of the door and gave Paul's face a great swipe with her wet tongue. It was as if she said, "Why's everyone so quiet? I'm here. Me, Misty." She reached out for Marine, too, and as Marine turned her cheek to be nuzzled, she noticed a few copper-colored hairs from Phantom's tail caught in the half-door of the stall. Winding them into a circlet, she fastened them above the manger. "Guess she was just a phantom after all," Marine spoke quietly. "Course she was," said Paul. Grandpa began working hard at the bristles in his ears. "Ye done the right thing, children," he said huskily. "Phantom was never what you'd call happy. She belongs to Assateague. But Misty here, she belongs to us." At mention of her name, Misty sidled over to Grandpa and scratched her head up and down against his broad shoulder. How good it was to be the center of attention. She went from one to the other, butting her face gently against Paul's pocket, asking for a kernel of corn, lipping Marine, nipping the brim of Grandpa's battered old hat. "Phantom was a good mommy," Marine said. "She stayed with her baby as long as she needed to." "Colt's got to grow up sometime," she declared, her thoughts slipping back to what the fire chief had said. Misty seemed to sense the importance of the moment. She backed away from the group, her head uplifted, not towards the sea and island of Assateague, but inland toward the well-pounded trails of Chincoteague. Her whole body quivered as if she saw a promise of great things to come, of races won, of foals tagging at her side. Overcome by all the excitement in store, she kicked her heels in ecstasy and let out a high, full whinny of joy. It sounded for all the world like explosive laughter. Paul gave a little gasp. "What did she say?" Marine asked quickly. "Well, I never." Paul's eyes widened in disbelief. Grandpa clapped his hat far down on his head. "Land's sakes, Paul, you never what?" "I reckon I never heard a pony talk so plain. Why, she just laughed down deep inside her. 'I'm Misty of Chincoteague,' she said, plainer than any words."